Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking all about how to measure trust in an organization. So today's agenda, we're going to start by a very quick introduction. Then we're going to talk about what is trust, how to measure trust, how to increase trust, and then how to operationalize trust in your organization. So for those that don't know me, my name is Robin Leonard. I'm the CEO and co-founder of AFDigital. I've got 6 Salesforce certs and I'm continuing my learning path always. We're also on the Salesforce Marketing Cloud, a partner advisory board, which I'll talk about in a bit. And my background before starting AFDigital was really, I was the ex-IBM lead BA / Agile PM, and really had a long stint at Vodafone as a CRM business analyst. So that's a bit about my background. Please feel free to reach out to me on social, Robin_AFD. And my business, AFDigital, we are a trusted Salesforce partner. We're a multi-cloud partner, so we work across sales, service, marketing, and community cloud. And then we have a large range of ISV partners, which are like iPhone apps for Sales Phone. So they really fill in the gaps. In some cases, we have a very specific requirement. Our value proposition is really starting with architecture, advisory services around marketing and technology. We also provide transformation projects, and this is really to rapidly implement your Salesforce. And then we also have a managed service program called Team X, and it's short for Team Extension. It's really hybrid managed services to augment your business with skills that you may not have today. And so this is hybrid because it's really a mixture of technology and marketing skills. As I mentioned, we are on the advisory board for Salesforce partners for Marketing Cloud. So this happens about once a year where we go and join them, and we're really sitting alongside really large global partners. There's 12 partners on the board, including Accenture, Deloitte, Publicis, those kind of partners. So this is an amazing honor. And as a business, AFDigital has a really wide variety of experience. We do have some specialization in travel, retail, NFP, financial services, healthcare, you name it. We've got a lot of depth, but really where the magic is actually sharing some of the use cases and advancements from across industries. That's really where a lot of the value is, because there's a lot of commonality across industries in terms of the business process. Great, so let's start talking about trust. And firstly, what is trust? Let's define it. So if you ask Google on the left, out of 2.19 billion results, what is trust? It's really a firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. So, and that's quite reasonable. But I just want to focus you in on the fact it's a firm belief. So we're going to touch on kind of what that may mean, but it's really that person has a belief. If you ask my senior leaders in my business on the right, this is how they define trust. So trust is personal, and meaning that it's very much a personal thing, like it's one-to-one. It's not a general thing that's shared by multiple people. It's very much in your own brain. Trust is contextual. So, and this is really interesting. I may trust you with my Salesforce org, but I do not trust you with my baby. And that was a really interesting finding we had when we talked through this. And then the next three, really interesting. Trust is a bank balance. So similar to sleep, it's earned over time or it's eroded over time. And the really funny thing is that different people, they start with a different bank balance. So some of my team said they start on 0 and you have to earn my trust, whereas others said, oh, well, it starts full and over time you erode my trust. So, you know, it's very personal. We all agreed, though, that trust is necessary for relationships to be successful. Trust is letting go. So imagine on a football team, you can have a star player that never passes the ball and you still win, but he doesn't trust his teammates. A large part of trust is actually just letting go, passing the ball, and trusting your teammate has got it. And finally, trust is being candid. So trust is being able to express your frustrations or give feedback and not get attacked for giving that feedback. But it's also trust is that when someone gives you feedback, it's it's rational and it's structured and yeah. So trust is got to be candid. So this is how our business define trust, and these are relatively soft definitions. I'm going to take it a step further. So if we think through why trust exists, or maybe the origins of trust, trust was a necessary concept for trading. And if you think about the early days when we were first trading and money was first kind of going through its early iterations, trust was absolutely necessary. Trust may have been in having the same currency. Trust may have been in looking similar. Trust may have been in having the same religion. But there was kind of a need for trust, and that trust has really always been a requirement for being able to trade. If you think about what a brand is the trust that the brand will deliver a promise. So if you really look back into the early days, again, I believe it was brand was really from slave trading and also from cattle trading and not necessarily great things, but that's really the origins of brand. And it was really, I guess, trust that whoever had bred that cattle had taken care of it or had fed it correctly. So this was really interesting as a concept. If we take that a step further, and let's talk about perception. And I don't expect everyone to understand this today, but I do want to give it to you as a gift so that you can take it away, and it's going to screw with your brain for the next 7 days or so if you haven't heard of this before. So I first heard of this from Jay Shetty, who heard it from a monk or somebody else. So I am not my perception of me. I am not your perception of me. I am my perception of your perception of me. So it's a really interesting concept because if we just break it down, I am not my perception of me. So I am Robin. I am a 37-year-old entrepreneur. I'm definitely not that. So I am also not your perception of me. So I am not what you think I am. Like if you think I am a 37-year-old entrepreneur, I'm definitely not that. I'm not what's in your brain about me. And the reason I can't be that is because I can't logically be everything in everyone's brain about me. But what I am is I am my perception of your perception of me. So I am what I think that you think that I am. And this is the really interesting thing is uh, that I am as a person, my reality is what I think the sum of all of the people I know think about me. So this is where it's going to screw with you for a little bit. So this is really defining reality, remember. So this is what the reality is. My reality is my perception of your perception of me. And so if I think that a lot of people think I'm a great guy, then that's my reality. I'm like, yeah, I think everyone thinks I'm a good guy, so therefore I am a good guy. That is the reality. So let's take this back to the brand. And if we think about what a brand is and what brand trust is, it's really a sum of a large group of people that have interacted with that brand, and they all think it's great. But the brand trust doesn't really exist anywhere. It's really a kind of a false thing, but it does exist in the sense that it exists in all of the minds of these people. So if I'm Qantas or Bunnings or Aldi, I really am, my reality is actually the sum of the perception of all of these people that have interacted with my brand and have this perception. It's just an interesting concept. It's interesting that humans can trust a brand, that they put trust in a brand, that they think that a brand can hold trust. It's actually quite a uh, like it's not actually real what that is. It's quite a subjective thing. And again, going back to what reality is, the reality of those brands is really the sum of well, it's what it thinks the sum of all the perceptions of it is. So this is not necessarily a simple a topic, but it's the fact is that this is what trust is. Like when we say, this is a trusted brand, it's actually trust in the eyes of a lot of people. So if we think about how to define trust and what makes up that trust, that perception, it's not necessarily so black and white. So this is a study done around the building blocks of trust. So you can see right at the top, is that brand going to protect my personal data is one of the most important things. But also, will it work as advertised? Is it safe? Are they going to deliver on their brand promise? So really interesting that this is kind of the composition of trust in a brand. Will they treat employees well? Will they pay the taxes they owe? So it's great for us to understand a little bit more depth about trust, and we know that people really care about this. They really care. This was a Salesforce study done last year. 73% of customers say trust in a company matters more than it did a year ago. And so that's really, it's a humanization of a brand. All of these humans are like, I really trust this brand is gonna look after me. Let's jump forward to the future a little bit. So we've really understood what trust may be. It's kind of a human subjective thing. Let's think about the future. If anyone hasn't heard of Ray Kurzweil, I'd really recommend jumping on YouTube and just listening to what he has to say. Basically, he's quite a scientific, calculative inventor. And what he's done over the last 30 years is predicted future technologies. He's got an 86% success rate. So really worth looking into him. He's got some incredible predictions, and he's also invented some really great technology that's changed the world as we know it. What I'd encourage everyone to start thinking about is business is actually an algorithm. And so if you think about what is an algorithm is input plus process plus output. So it's really, you have some things that go into it and something changes following a procedure or a process, and then you get an output. Very similar way of framing it is event, reaction, outcome. So something happens, there's a reaction or a response, and then you get an outcome. And that reaction again is that procedure or process that happens when the event happens. If you think a bit more widely around it, let's look at some other examples. So if you look at a recipe book, so if you add the fruit and the vegetables and the meat and you follow the recipe book, you'll get a predictable outcome. You'll get that meal that's cooked. If you go to Google and key in a search query, you'll get a search result page. And that's a predictable outcome, although the outcome isn't known before you do it, obviously. But the fact that it does that, it just follows a pattern. So a dog, how is that an algorithm? So generally, when you give a dog a bone, it's going to want to eat it. When you pat a dog, it's going to enjoy it and want more. Uh, a dog is really a result of, well, it's a pattern, but it's a result of its breeding and also its genetics. So depending on those two factors, it will respond in different ways, but generally it's a pattern, it's predictable. If you raise it in the right way and if it has good breeding, then you can expect a consistent result. An algorithm is a process or a set of rules to be followed in calculations or other problem-solving operations. So it's very simple. This is what an algorithm is. We talk about algorithms all the time. But what I'm trying to do is really related to business. Yuval Noah Harari, if you haven't heard of this guy, I'd highly recommend buying his books. Homo Deus is his second book, where he muses, are organisms really just algorithms? And is life really just data processing? It's a really crazy idea, but the more you think about it, the more it starts to make sense. If I think about myself as an algorithm, as a biological algorithm, uh, I am really tuned. I've been raised by two amazing people. Um, I have a really great genetic background. I hope, I think, and all of these things contributed to making me who I am and helping me respond in the way I respond. But I am a predictable algorithm. I'm just not well understood, I guess, by science yet, but I'm still an algorithm. And just like a company is an algorithm, so if we think about AFDigital, it's an algorithm. If we receive a complaint, we respond in a consistent way, or I hope we do. If we have a sales opportunity, we should respond in a consistent way as well. So really, a business, a person, a recipe book, it's all just an algorithm. It's all just a repeatable process. Yeah, so just to make this very simple, um, if we think about really how humans like to interact with companies, they actually prefer interacting with robots. 90% of Australians under 39 prefer dealing with automated checkouts. So it, this is really, I mean, it's intuitive that this will be the case. I'm sure most people listening would prefer dealing with an automated checkout than having to speak to somebody and, be nice and put on a face and, maybe, if you're feeling sick, especially, or if you're afraid of catching something, so sometimes you just want the quick service. You want it to be, you don't want to hassle somebody with your problems, but you just want to figure it out yourself. This is actually quite evident in how people prefer to deal with brands moving forward. So let's really dive in. I like to use a robot vacuum as a metaphor. So if we think about a robot vacuum as a metaphor for business, and so this is my robot vacuum. You can see here that it maps out my apartments. It's got a camera, sensor, and a bumper. And it has this app, and it maps out my full apartment. Its primary objective is to clean up the dust, and it has it decides with its processor how it moves around my apartment to map it out in the most efficient way. It receives upgrades 3 times, or sorry, not 3 times. It receives upgrades regularly. The other day it got an upgrade and now it doesn't eat curtains. So I'm just waiting for the upgrade where it doesn't eat cables and then I'll be very happy. The fact is, this is a robot. This is a normal robot. This is how robots will act. If we think about business, instead, and this is how a business acts. And let's remind ourselves that the business is an automated algorithm to an extent. So you've got in a business a lot of people, and each of those people has a document that says this is my job description and this is my procedure document. They also have access to some databases, which are often siloed across the business. And these guys, if you think about them collecting dust, they're really walking around sweeping up that dust individually. But there's lots of them doing it all at the same time, trying to do it in unison. The problem with this model is that sometimes people move in the wrong direction. They aren't super efficient changing directions either. If you want to change a person's direction, you have to change the procedure or their job description. It's a bit of a hassle, so you kind of end up with a lot of wastage. And also, we are limited often in our thinking that we can only really increase our revenue by adding more of these sweepers, these humans, which shouldn't be the case. So, and this is really interesting. And if you rethink about how business could be if we thought about it more like a robot vacuum that was sweeping up that dust automatically, and if we had a central processor that has a perception, so the perception being all of the information around it and internal, it holds all of that information, just like that app mapped out my apartment. The robot maps out everything it knows about the customer and about the business environment it works in. It then uses that data to make decisions automatically, and hopefully it gets upgraded regularly. And if you're part of the Salesforce ecosystem, there's 3 major upgrades every year where it just really gets cranked up a notch 3 times a year. It's awesome. So this is really thinking about your business like a robot vacuum. And also one other thing I didn't mention is the ability for the robot vacuum to communicate machine to machine. So if you think about an API type strategy where it can actually easily share data securely with other systems, other robots, to do its job more effectively. So all of these things really make up the future of what our business should look like if it becomes more automated, which we know it has to become. So as we automate the business, and I talked a lot about what is trust, and then what is a business really, and really focusing in on that business being an automated algorithm. In order for us to ensure that the algorithm is doing the right thing, we need to be able to measure trust. So we need to know that it's building trust and it's not eroding trust. So how do we measure trust? So if we look at this equation, if you Google trust, this is what it says. How do you measure trust? Trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation. So this is a great formula. Credibility, do they know their stuff? Reliability, do they always deliver? Can I rely on them? And intimacy, I will feel safe with them. Divided by self-orientation. So this is the interesting part about this equation is that it's divisible by self-orientation, which means are they focused on my interests or theirs? So if I'm greedy, if I'm self-oriented, if I'm all about myself, I have a high number here, then that's going to decrease my overall trust dramatically. If I have a low number, so if I'm thinking like a non-profit, I have low self-orientation, I'm not trying to make a profit, I'm just trying to help, then I'm more trustworthy. As my business have really tried to take on trust, it's our number 1 value. We've really looked into how we can measure each of these items. And this is really hopefully a bit of a takeaway for what you could do is to really look into each of these items. Credibility, what does that mean to you and how can you measure it? So for my businesses, testimonials, reference customers, success stories, customer satisfaction surveys, Glassdoor, reviews, etc. but I can also reduce that credibility by lying or cheating or acting shady. So, my advice would be to go through each of these guys as a business and say, how do I measure this currently? What are my measures for reliability? This is a really great model to ensure that you're really focused on building trust as a business. So if you do automate elements of this process, it's going in the right direction. So as our business measures trust, AFDigital, the way we've really achieved this is to have a single customer view. And so the single customer view, it took a bit of work, but really we've made sure that we have one database, one view that has sales, service, marketing, delivery, finance, and HR centralized. That really allows us, that data centralization allows us to report on all of those things in the trust equation without having to pull in lots of data sets or talk to different systems or anything like that. And we also automate this. So with Salesforce, you can automate your dashboards to be sent to your email every day. And this is really a large part of how we operate, is to be data driven and to make sure that we have full visibility over the reality and not act on hunch on our business or rely on reports that are a month old. So how do you increase trust? So we've talked about how to measure trust and how to operate in a world where you're data driven, but how do you actually affect it? So it's kind of obvious. Increased credibility, and really it's up to you to define what credibility means to your customers. But it's really like, we need more certs, accreditations, we need more references, we need more testimonials. The more that you have, the more your credibility will go up. Reliability, increased reliability. So how do I increase my responsiveness, my timeliness, my consistency, and my quality? And again, it's going back to, how do you define reliability and measuring it and improving it? And intimacy. So having a single customer view, surveying your customers, having internal knowledge articles or a knowledge base that tracks the information about your customer so that you don't have to re-ask the same question. Listening to your customer to understand their sentiment, all of those things really increase your intimacy. And decreasing self-orientation. This one is quite hard to measure, to be honest. So you can either focus on customer success or you can reduce customer friction. So I feel like we've actually taken a path for our business of measuring it through reducing customer friction. So the more that we can make it customer focused, the more that we can make our service easy for the customer, the more it's about them and less about us. So measuring that, again, quite challenging, but this one, if you think creatively about what is self-orientation for you as a business, and then measuring that. And finally, there's one more thing that we haven't really talked about, but we touched on at the start. And it's great to measure all of these things, but we're always going to have an element of human touch with our business. And we're always going to have those ambiguous scenarios where humans don't know how to be, especially if we're relying on them for tier 2, tier 3 escalations where we've got chatbots as tier 1. They've got to deal with the harder situations where humans are a little bit more ambiguous to deal with. So that's why it's so important as part of your trust strategy, not only to measure it and to focus on increasing it in these areas, but to also build a culture of trust. So the culture of trust ensures that regardless of the situation, that your people, when put on the spot in the worst of times, are going to act in a trustworthy way. And so for me, it's really, if I was to increase it, yes, there's tangible metrics and changes you can make, but really you've got to do your people. You've got to make sure your people, when put on the spot, when it's ambiguous, that they will act in the correct way. And that's only through creating culture. So how do we operationalize this? How do we make this a reality? It's one thing to talk about trust, but how do we actually change it? So, and this is very simple. And this is how I am going about building trust in my organization. First step is to define it. And you can see I've thought a lot about this topic, and I've talked to my leadership team, and we've really defined what trust means to us. Then also defining what are your trust builders and killers, because within that definition of trust, you can also detract from trust or gain trust. You also start at different levels of that bank balance, remember. So you can start at 0 or you can start at full, but you can change it. It's not black and white, it's not static, it's dynamic. Then moving on to measuring trust, and this is really just establishing it as a metric. It's making it real. It's saying, yes, we talked about it a lot, and it's not subjective. It's actually a thing. We can measure what we believe trust to be. We can take control over that trust equation and make it real. And then finally, practicing behaving in a trustworthy way. Again, it's dynamic. You can be going really well, and then you can make a mistake. You have to keep going. You have to keep practicing. And it's not just one thing that you do, it's everything, and it's everyone in the organization. Everyone has to practice trust all the time, and if it's not always perfect, but just it has to keep going. So it's yeah, I think this is really key, is once you've kind of defined it and you've understood it and you start measuring it, that you as an organization, you have a commitment to practicing it. So that's really my explanation of how to measure trust in an organization. I hope it was helpful. You know, it's an evolving conversation because trust is quite a subjective subject, but I think we all agree how important it is to understand what this means, because we all know it's super important. So please reach out to me if you have any questions or would like to have a further discussion on the topic.